Is that going now? The watercolor you're going to be using is in these palettes, okay? The palettes are over on the left-hand side of the sink. All of them have usable paint in them. This is for my painting one class. Some students have even gone to lengths of labeling the color. We have 10 colors that we typically use, 2 of each primary. I'll get into that much later. What you can do is just flip the lid underneath, and if you're missing a color, you'll find it in the tubes, okay? All the tubes, you'll have to look closely, but they're labeled. They're going to be labeled similar to the colored pencils you've been using as well. But burnt umber, you'll want to try to find that in your palette. If it's not labeled, come see me, and I will help you find it. So these are the tubes. It's very concentrated, so you won't need a lot of paint. That'll be plenty. That'll last a long time. Most of your palettes already have plenty of paint in them, and you can see from these, you know, all of these little lumps, once I get them wet and activate them, it becomes usable paint. So the wonderful thing is you rarely have to clean your palette because, you know, you're just going to keep using that paint, okay? You're going to use a water basin. You can fill the water up on this side. There's a little tread at the bottom for cleaning. You don't fill it over this, okay? And never leave your brushes soaking in water. I would rather you leave this side dry, and you can just kind of set them in there. There's also, you know, holders to kind of set your brushes off into the side here. What happens when you get the brush wet, floating in there like that, is just like we talked about with your paper, things expand like a sponge, contract and shrink. What happens is eventually this wood, the paint chips off from expanding and contracting so much, and then the ferrule, the metal capping on the brush, becomes loose, starts to fall apart, and pretty soon your brush is falling apart. So try to avoid that. Most of our watercolor brushes are the most expensive brushes that we have, okay? We talked about a wash being transparent layers of color. You're going to need clean water to do these. So the first one, definitely have clean water. We're going to do a wet on wet. I'm just going to walk you through each one of these, and then I'm going to set you free, and then you can watch this video again if you need to. A wet on wet wash is wet paper, so I'm getting quite a bit of water, wetting the page, and then I'm going to come back with a color. And I'm going to load up my brush, and I'm just going to do a wet wash. With each of these washes, I would really recommend that you try to gradate from dark to light. So see what you can do as far as doing, you know, kind of a gradation. Practice going from light to dark, because we're going to probably needing to do that within your project. Okay, so there's a wet on wet, a wet on dry. That was cadmium red. You may want to note the colors you're using, because you might really end up liking some or not liking some, and then you'll know which ones you want to use. I'm going to use alizarin crimson now, and I'm going to do the wet on dry. I guess I'll just pull from top to bottom here and see how that goes. The paper we're using is not really a watercolor paper. The one we're going to do for our project is watercolor paper. It will perform a lot better. What's in your visual journal is more of a vellum, but it'll work. It'll hold up, especially for practicing. What I really want you to get the feel for is how much water to load into your brush, how much pigment, how much paint to put in your brush, and it kind of takes a feel. You got to get a hang of it. So that's why we'll practice a little bit. Sorry, you're getting kind of a glare there from all that liquid. It takes a little bit of time to practice it. So I want you to practice it in your book. I've already done this one ahead of time because it requires dry on dry. So I did a gradated wash, a wet on dry wash, and you can see the difference between the two, the quality of them. This one has a much more sort of bleeded look, you know, where it kind of lets the paint sort of flow. It's more unpredictable, ends up interesting, I think, in the way it dries. The wet on dry is much more smooth and more of maybe that ombre effect that we're used to with our value bars that I've had you do. Dry brush is really what it sounds like. I'm going to squeeze a lot of the water out of my brush over here off screen, and I'm just going to pick a contrasting color. Let's use that burnt umber that I added into the palette. So you'll note I can actually use the paint wet out of the tube, or I can just activate it by getting it wet if it's already dry. And then I'm just going to use this brush a little bit more dry, so less pigment. So typically when we use the dry brush, I usually teach my students about it for kind of creating outlining or edging. We do it in landscaping. For your product ad, though, I'm not sure, you know, it does have a lot of applications. So you can use it to kind of sketch and draw. A dry brush, just what it sounds like. Less water, okay? We have some watercolor pencils, and I would like you to experiment with those. I think those will be really helpful for you. You're welcome to use our color pencils in this project as well. The watercolor pencil, you can use it like a regular colored pencil. You're going to want to sharpen them with a hand sharpener. You could layer them, though, like you've learned. You can shade with the pressure of your hand as well. So let me just show you a few things with that. So I'm going to just layer in a little bit of blue on this one. I could mix them together a little bit. All you need to do with this is activate it. So just use a little bit of water. We can come back in, and you have to agitate it a little bit. So kind of scrub at it a little bit, and then you're able to actually activate that paint and then just stretch it along your page. So the watercolor pencils are really nice because a lot of my students have a hard time doing a quick wash from light to dark. This would be a really easy way to do it because you can just put down a little bit of pigment, come in with a little bit of water, and you'll figure out how much. And you can easily just get it wet and quickly go from light to dark really fast, okay? A few things I wanted to maybe show you too is, let's go back to this gradated wash that's drying for us. Let's just get it wet again and kind of scrub it. In your project, as you're doing your product ad, you might get to a point where you're like, ooh, I got it too dark. If you get it before it completely sets up, you can take some toilet paper, which is most absorbent, instead of our paper towel, and you can actually blot back that color. So kind of absorb it out. You notice my paper is wrinkling. We talked about that too. This will wrinkle more than your page will because it's not real watercolor paper. You have to pay attention to your paper. So if it's getting agitated, it means it needs to rest. So I can only do so much in one area. So I'm going to let that be. I did lighten it up substantially, right? Which is, it's a way that you can kind of erase, okay? And if I want to darken that, I would just simply wait for it to dry. I'll do it right now though. I would just come back in and I'll add less water, more paint, and I'll layer over the top. Another thing I like to do is get my water, wash out my brush quick, squeeze out the water, and grab that and just pull it out. So kind of squeeze the paint, the water out, and then pull your wash out is another way of kind of getting that graded wash to happen. Okay? All right. I think I've already kind of demonstrated how to do a graded wash here already. So, you know, you're on your own with that one. I think I've been showing you in all these, and I would encourage you to try it in all of them. I'm just going to show you the mixed washes here, and I want to have you kind of understand how you can mix some color, okay? So one way of mixing color, we've got some yellow down. It's lemon yellow. I'm going to bring over, let's see, we'll bring over the ultramarine blue. I put the lighter value down first, just like we do with color pencil. I'm going to bring in a little bit of blue with a lot of water because I don't want my blue to overpower too much. But I'm hoping that I can mix green when I layer it over. So one way of doing watercolor and mixing color is just to layer it like transparent sheets of glass. And traditionally that's really what watercolorists will do. If we want to mix an orange, let's use that CAD red here and see what we get with that. We'll come over and we'll layer that over the top. I might need to come back and layer my yellow in as well so it gets a little bit more orange. But you can see as that's starting to dry, the colors don't show up as accurately up here. But it's really starting to look green and it's really starting to look orange for me. One other way of mixing colors I want to show you, and I'll show you kind of in the middle here, is basically finding the mixtures you'd like. And we're going to take that inner well, and I can put some paint in there with water. And I can also, let's take this cadmium yellow, and we can take this in here as well. And then I usually always recommend taking and mixing your dark to your light, right? So you can mix up an orange right there. If we want it darker, we can take more red and force it darker, or just mix it all together here, and you can get that secondary color that way, okay? Once you find the mixer, the combination you like, this was cadmium red, cadmium yellow, it gave us the cadmium orange, then you could actually find the two tubes and you could squeeze out. Can you guys see this one? This is it's a Windsor blue and lemon yellow that have just been squeezed in here and then allowed to dry. So every time I mix them together, it makes the green. So it'd be a way for you to mix color. You see that happening? So you can kind of do them as transparent washes, or mix them in your palette. If you need to clean your palette, especially in the center, you can just get it wet, scrub it up a little bit, take your toilet paper, and you can kind of clean off that mixing space for yourself. You may want to record in your visual journal or in your sketchbook as we're doing this the recipes you're using, because that'll help you when you get to your project, okay?